I'll say it now. I just can't believe what it must feel like to be an Orlando Pride fan in 2024, dealing with constant, player turnover, coaching turnover, some truly disastrous seasons in the late 2010s. And then now to be here in 2024 when they are by far the best team in the league. And like I said, up there with some of the best teams in NWSL history. This, like, the amazing thing, right, about the NWSL is you just never know how things can change. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Tuesday, September 3rd. Happy to be back talking NWSL, WNBA. A lot to dig into there where we've got some teams making some surges to the playoff line. We've got some teams falling off, both in basketball and in soccer. And then we have a wonderful chat with NWSLPA President Tori Huster about the league's landmark new CBA, what it means for the past, the present, and the future. Much to dig into. Let's get started. All right. We are back, and so is the NWSL, back from after the Olympic break. There have been 2 match weekends post-Olympic break, post-Summer Cup, post some of these more international style friendlies that we saw. So it's kind of going to be a bit of NWSL analysis, mostly just focused on the regular season here to see sort of where teams are rising, which teams are in a little bit of trouble going into this final push towards the playoffs. So we still don't have any teams officially clinched for playoffs. We don't have any teams officially eliminated, but we're seeing major trends in that direction. And this same kind of idea of what the league is this year has continued to play through even after that extensive regular season break for the Olympics, which is just that we kind of have this top 4 that I feel very strongly saying these are going to be playoff teams. These teams are probably also going to finish again in that top 4. They're going to be in that race to the shield. And then there's everybody else. There are some mid-table teams. There are some teams making that push to try to hit like 6th, 7th, or 8th. But we kind of have this top 4. And we kind of have everybody else. So before we jump in, I'm going to do a quick overall look at the standings just to get all of our ducks in a row. And then we'll talk about what we saw this weekend and maybe what it means for the upcoming week. So in first place, we still have the Orlando Pride, who are still unbeaten in 18 games. They have 13 wins and 5 draws. Second, Washington Spirit. Third, KC Current. We'll talk about that in a second. 4th, Gotham FC. 5th, North Carolina. 6th, Portland Thorns. 7th, Chicago Red Stars. 8th, Bay FC. 9th, Angel City. 10th, Racing Louisville. 11th, Seattle. 12th, San Diego. 13th, Utah. And 14th, Houston. So we've seen some movement since that big Olympic break. So I want to talk about kind of what we saw from the top teams and then maybe what it does look like when we see these other teams kind of pushing to finish the season above the playoff line. So teams I think should be feeling good are Orlando, Gotham, and Washington. Orlando, obviously, their unbeaten run doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. Very, very difficult to beat. The combination of sturdy defense and really good finishing. However, what's exciting, I think, for Orlando is they're doing it specifically without Barbara Banda on the score sheet in these last 2 games. And that feels like a huge positive to them. So there was some discussion on the timeline, maybe if you were following this Orlando versus Gotham game, about how Orlando is really finishing their chances. Those Adriana goals against Gotham were not kind of these high XG chances. It wasn't necessarily those perfect, like, worked in processes or sequences to get a player in on goal, but they were just fabulous finishes. And I think that for Orlando, it's a little bit of luck and it's a little bit of skill. They are outperforming their XG at this point, which means that they are finishing chances that are not sort of those necessarily highest quality chances. They're just finishing really well. Sometimes you worry that those kinds of streaks will lighten up or that you're going to have one player go cold and other players aren't going to be able to take the reins. I think what the nice thing for the Pride is that their defense is playing really well. They are progressing the ball well, and their strikers are finishing their chances. So Orlando still looks very, very difficult to beat. There's this old adage that you kind of don't want to be unbeaten going into a postseason, right? Where your first loss could be the one that knocks you out of the playoffs. But for Orlando, I say they should just keep this rolling. As many good vibes as they possibly can keep going for the Pride, the better. I thought Gotham, who played Orlando this week, after a rain delay, there was some weather this weekend that did kind of disrupt the flow of things. Gotham probably should have put up a little bit more of a fight against the Pride. Not their best game. But I do just still think what we saw from last week from Gotham and then even this week in the loss, their depth still has me feeling pretty good about them going forward. They are having those reintegration issues where they have players come back from the Olympics and need to go on limited minutes. They have some players who are injured, like they're still kind of dealing with the season-ending injury of Midge Purce. There's some of that attacking firepower with Lynn Williams out, who returned from the Olympics with a little bit of a knock. they don't always have the players that they need to compete with the best of the best. And obviously they're going to try to get those players back later this season, but their depth does have me feeling really good about how they should feel going forward. And then the Spirit probably should have won against San Diego this weekend, in my opinion, kind of based again sort of on what we saw from the advanced stats or the underlying stats of the game. But they are one of the most enjoyable teams to watch right now. You've got Croy Bethune and Trinity Rodman coming back from the Olympics, absolutely flying. Bethune has tied the single season record for assists. Trinity Rodman is like the superstar of the summer, in my opinion. It's like her, Swanson, and Smith. Like, I think Rodman is really the true breakout star of the Olympics. I think that the Spirit are going to be the number one team that you do not want to play in the postseason right now, maybe second to Orlando. And I do think they're going to make a push for the Shield. I really do. I think the vibes are very, very good in DC right now. They have a very reliable way that they play and the way that they run their midfield. And they're having contributors from players who are like playing out of position. I think people notice like Paige Matire having such a good game last weekend. They're getting contributions from different places, and their superstars are stepping up. And I think that that's a great sign for the Spirit. However, there are some teams that are actually still doing fine in the standings where I think there are some big alarm bells, right? I mean, people might kind of see some of these trends where the standings don't always tell the whole story. Portland and Kansas City. Portland have lost their last 2 games. Kansas City has lost their last 3 after starting the season unbeaten up until that point. The Thorns appear kind of aimless after they have given Rob Gale the permanent head coaching position, but it doesn't seem like they're taking that next step forward with that stability. They did some kind of light tweaks and some minor changes to kind of fix the way that they were playing, or that kind of full team defense to shore up some of their deficiencies in the middle of the season. It still kind of feels like they're having trouble maintaining that. I think their defense has not been top NWSL quality all year, and we saw more of that in their loss this weekend. We've also seen just how important Sophia Smith is to this team. She, to me, is an MVP candidate, not just because of the way that she's been playing, which is very, very good, but also just she is by far, I think, the most important player to an individual playoff contender than maybe anybody else in the MVP kind of conversation right now. And then Kansas City, they have also some serious questions on their back line that I think people remember us talking at the beginning of the season where we go, oh, they'll figure those out. And right now they're scoring a lot, so it's fine. They're out shooting people. They're outscoring people. They're getting into these shootouts and they're making it work. Then they've had some personnel issues in the back where they lose Gabby Robinson for the rest of the season. They try to kind of answer some of this. They sign Alana Cook. They've made a shift in goal, taking Adie Franch out and starting Alma Schultz in goal. But then they lose first to Washington and then to North Carolina after that heartbreaker people remember right before the Olympic break to Orlando. It's questionable now, I think, for Kansas City. They were playing so well at the beginning of the year, but here's my pitch for Kansas City, which is that I don't really think things have changed. I think that their attack isn't operating as well because they're missing a player like Bia. I think that their defense never got a chance to settle because of injuries. And that can be killer at this point in the season, especially when other teams are playing as well as, other teams are more kind of honing in their more strategic attack, their sharper attack. I think you could argue tactical rigidity. I think you could argue over-reliance on Temba Chewinga, who is also having a fabulous season. Talk about that MVP shortlist. She's definitely in that conversation for Kansas City. But their personnel from game to game also feels like a bit of a mess. And I don't necessarily think it's the coaching staff's fault, but it is an issue of, rather than feeling like Kansas City is steadying into this final quarter of the season, it feels like they are trying things to try to get that right mix going into the postseason. And I feel like that's kind of touchy times maybe for NWSL if you're making those changes right now. Now, maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe things will kind of even out and they'll feel stronger going into the postseason. But I'm curious to see if Kansas City falls off the pace for Shield. So that's kind of the top of the table. Those are the teams that I'm really interested in that conversation of who's going to be vying for the Shield, who's going to be very solidified in the playoff race. I think we've also seen nice games from North Carolina, but also the race for 8th is kind of perplexing to me. As I keep saying this, as people might know, 8 playoff spots for NWSL this season, expanded from 6. And everything around the playoff line is getting a little bit interesting, but also you're just seeing teams really struggle to take control. Like, for example, Racing Louisville had a very active transfer window. They made a lot of trades. They signed a lot of players. It seemed like they were really pushing, even like giving up maybe some of their prospects for the future in order to win now. And now they've slipped out of playoff position. They kind of had a chance to grab onto 8th and not let go. And now they're sitting on the outside looking in. You've got Chicago, who kind of feel like they're in this sort of weekly free fall. They're having troubles with their defense. They're still solidifying their midfield and their attack, but they still have a healthy hold on 7th due to some of their earlier results. Bay FC and Angel City are now tied on points, kind of battling for that 8th. Bay holding that spot above the playoff line due to a tiebreaker. Angel City actually has been making a nice push. We're seeing some of their signings get on the field. We're seeing the return of injured players like Kristen Press. We're seeing some of that. We're seeing a big step forward from Melissa Thompson, who had a little bit of a slow start to the season. Kind of like what Angel City is cooking. I think they could do a similar thing to what they did last year and make a really late push above the playoff line. But also, like, Utah looks better coming out of the Olympics. Seattle looks better coming out of the Olympics. We're seeing some of those teams that maybe we had written off to the basement status of the league looking a lot better out of the Olympic break as well. San Diego, still a kind of middling. I don't really know what the future is for them. They're under interim management of Landon Donovan. It seems like it's fine, but not great. So yeah, I don't know. This NWSL season feels very like there's the best and then there's all the rest, which I keep saying is very normal for an expansion year. But maybe my solace in that is even if that race to the bottom of that playoff to get above the line doesn't feel as exciting just because we're not seeing like significant changes in form, or maybe we're seeing teams that should be more talented than others and not being able to control, or we're just seeing individual results not be taken care of due to coaching staff issues. Like maybe we are having issues with the middle part of this table feeling, I don't know, just like they're playing their best soccer. But I like the fact that with these top four teams, we are seeing some of the best soccer. I think we're seeing some of these teams. People keep talking about like the records that Orlando is breaking, and they're on this conversation with like 2017, 2018 North Carolina Courage, 2019 North Carolina Courage. We're talking about a team that is actually competing with some of the best teams in NWSL history if you're looking across these record lines. And that in and of itself is a delight to witness. And again, I said this on Twitter, I'll say it now. I just can't believe what it must feel like to be an Orlando Pride fan in 2024, dealing with constant, player turnover, coaching turnover, some truly disastrous seasons in the late 2010s. And then now to be here in 2024 when they are by far the best team in the league. And like I said, up there with some of the best teams in NWSL history. This, like, the amazing thing, right, about the NWSL is you just never know how things can change. So it's been exciting to see how players and teams are dealing after the break, but also there's a lot to go. And then now switching over to WNBA, kind of similar vibes to NWSL in a way. If we're talking big picture, we're talking standings and playoff clinching. And you watch both leagues and you're like, oh, we're seeing some similar patterns. WNBA catch up, kind of where I see things with the standings is you have the big three, which are New York, Connecticut, and Minnesota, all three of which have already clinched playoffs. The hottest team in the league right now is arguably Indiana. So watch out, world. Here comes Indiana. The Aces, the back-to-back defending champions, Aces look kind of shaky, but Asia Wilson is playing so well that it might not matter. I'm still not entirely convinced by the Seattle Storm or the Phoenix Mercury. They're really inconsistent. You don't know what kind of team you're going to get on any day. They have some teams that they kind of own. They have some teams that they really struggle with. And then eighth, kind of like I said, kind of like NWSL, is sort of anybody's guess. Chicago is currently holding on barely. They're tied in record with Atlanta. They have the tie break. There are games being played tonight. So when you're listening to this, you might have more clarity on the playoff picture than even I do at this moment. But you've got, Atlanta trying to make a push, but they're struggling to get the wins that they need. Dallas is playing really well on offense, but they're being let down by their defense. Really interesting to see kind of who's going to end up in that eighth spot, because like the NWSL, like I said, just teams really struggling to take control. So with all of this swirling around, maybe let's just talk about some of the big storylines of the last couple of weeks. I think that maybe what we're going to talk about is matching the more national conversation, which we are getting to the last few weeks of the regular season. So people are thinking about awards, right? Individual accolades in basketball are such a big deal. It's so interesting to me coming back from the soccer sphere where MVP and NWSL absolutely matters, and you want to make team of the month and team of the year, but it definitely feels like the place on individual awards for basketball is even heavier than you even see in soccer. But maybe just the headline, and I'm not going to be the first to say this, which is just that Asia Wilson is going to win MVP. And the only question now is whether or not it's going to be unanimous. Number one's, it's not like there haven't been other good seasons. Nafisa Collier's playing very well. AT's playing very well. Clea Copper, Arika Ungubawale, Sabrina Ionescu, even Caitlin Clark is playing very, very well. But what Wilson is doing is, like, we're getting into this scenario of, like, we're stretching the level of human possibility status with Asia Wilson. She is doing things that possibly have never been seen before. Well, actually, in some of the records that she is poised to break, perhaps literally have never been seen before in WNBA history. She's poised to break the single season scoring record. She is leading Jewel Lloyd's points per game rate from last year. That was when Jewel Lloyd set what is now the current points per game record, and the current, not points per game record, sorry, the current total single season scoring record. Wilson plays tonight, so this is going to be even closer than the numbers I'm giving you right now. But at this moment, Wilson is at 879 points for the season. Lloyd's record is 939. There are enough games left. I can be pretty confident in saying that Wilson, barring injury or absence, is going to break that record. She might shatter that record. She's second in the league in rebounds. She leads the league in blocks. She's fourth in field goal percentage, so she's shooting high efficiency. She's all over the league-wide stat boards, just all over. And like I said, I think what we're watching with A'ja Wilson is not necessarily, is she having a good year? It's more, how is this person playing at this high of a level, close to probably their ceiling, for this many games in a row? I think the incredible thing is the consistency, because when you think about the modern greats, right? Maybe you look at like a Breanna Stewart or even going back to like a Candace Parker a little bit, years ago. It's less about how good is their ceiling, because we know how good their ceiling is. You see it come out in the playoffs, or you see it come out in individual games. But I think all of those players struggle with the consistency that we're seeing from Wilson this season. It's more just, how is this incredible player, who we know how high her ceiling is, reaching that max game in and game out, to the point where it's almost a little bit less celebratory, because I watch A'ja Wilson sometimes and I think, won't somebody help her? She's doing it because she's not necessarily always getting the help that she needs from her teammates. She scores 41 of Vegas's 97 points against Phoenix on Sunday. The team has been rotating their guards. Jackie Young had to sit out a game due to exhaustion out of the Olympics. As we know, the Aces were very heavily relied upon to win that Olympic gold medal for Team USA basketball. They are on a nice run of games right now, but a lot of it is kind of hanging on the performances of Wilson. There's a lot of weight on her shoulders right now. The Aces have always run tight rotations under Becky Hammon. That is not new, but they just they are not kind of the unbeatable team that we've seen over the last couple of years. They weren't particularly active in the free agency market after Candace Parker's abrupt retirement. They were maybe caught by surprise by that. They obviously have some off the court things going on. I don't know how much that is impacting the locker room, and their players are tired. And even in 2022 and 2023, with how tight those rotations were and how much that team relied on their starters, you always kept waiting to be like, oh my gosh, they're playing so well, but is there a limit? Is there a limit to what these players can do, again, day in and day out? And I think Wilson's teammates are reaching that limit, but it's because Wilson has not, that they are where they are right now. I can't bet against her. I'm not betting against A'ja Wilson in the postseason, but I do think there are other more balanced teams out there right now. And I think, unfortunately for the Aces, the scouting report gets easier and easier when you know that there are players that you can negate or nullify while letting Wilson do her thing. I think a lot of teams are very, very happy to let Wilson score as many points as she wants, so much as they shut everybody else down. So we will see how that goes in the postseason. But I want to talk briefly about the hottest team in basketball, the Indiana Fever. They are 8-2 in their last 10 games. They've risen to 6th in the standings and are over 500 for the first time since 2019, which we should note was not a season where they finished 500. They simply were over 500 briefly in 2019. Caitlin Clark has officially figured it out. I think she has the most serious claim to Rookie of the Year. Not really close, though I have really enjoyed, we're going to talk about in a second, just sort of how I have enjoyed the Rookie of the Year conversation. But I do think that it's Clark's to lose at this point. I think she has a legitimate argument to being all WNBA, but it's not just Clark. I mean, we are seeing Clark being able to facilitate some of those like QB1, those passes that were not necessarily connecting at the beginning of the season. We're seeing Clark get her arm strength back after the Olympic break. Again, I think it's been so good for the Fever that she actually did not go to the Olympics. But just as Clark is kind of raising her game, it's kind of a high tide situation. They're getting good minutes from a lot of different players. Kelsey Mitchell has had a fabulous run of form post-Olympics. She is a legitimate all-star and she's playing like it. Aaliyah Boston has continuously improved throughout the season. It seems like she's doing a lot better job of physically imposing herself. The pace of the game is she's matching the pace of the game a lot better than she was at the beginning of the season. They're getting great minutes from Lexi Hull. They've been rotating Lexi Hull in, and she's been shooting lights out from behind the arc because they haven't had Katie Lou Samuelson available. Amazing. Love to see it. They're seeing improving defense and efficiency from Nalissa Smith. Like, everyone is getting better at the same time, which is exactly what you want for this team, because I do think if they had not seen the growth that they are seeing right now, you should have to have a serious conversation about what the coaching staff is doing with the talent available to them, because this is a team. I mean, yes, they were not very, very good last year or the year before. That's why they keep getting high draft picks, but they keep getting high draft picks, and there's a lot of talent on this team. And to see it finally mesh is really cool. And like, necessary. This is what needed to happen for the Fever to legitimately make arguments that they are where they need to be going into this postseason. They're all clicking at the right time. They haven't officially clinched playoffs yet. Well, I say this as I'm recording it. It's possible they could clinch even without playing tonight, as we're talking on Tuesday. But they're the team I would not want to play in the postseason. They are hot. They are clicking. They have fans all over the country. And that is the team that I would not want to play in a best of 3 at the beginning of the postseason, to be completely honest. But to make a final point, perhaps, about the Rookie of the Year race, I always do this because I was talking to somebody else about this earlier. I do think that the debate between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, who is the other player who has kind of stuck with Clark the most in the Rookie of the Year race, especially with Cameron Brink going down with an injury early in the season, what you just don't want to forget, and Reese broke the single season record for rebounds this weekend. So not for a rookie, not rebounds for a rookie, all-time rebounds. This was a record held by Lynx legend Sylvia Fowles. She's going to smash it. She has, I think, 8 games to go. After breaking that record, she's going to annihilate this record. She might break it again next year and the year after that. She's going to be a big rebounder for the rest of her WNBA career. Just because Caitlin Clark is doing miraculous stuff in her rookie season, I think does not negate the fact that Reese is also doing crazy stuff in her rookie season. And I think it's very cool to see 2 rookies walk in and immediately be some of the best contributors just league wide for their teams. Now, we all know that Reese has some shooting percentage issues. I think that that's her big thing to work on. And I do think that is what separates her from Clark at this moment. But just really, really fascinating to see this big moment for the WNBA where everyone's very excited. They've got more eyeballs. Popularity is rising. And to have these 2 players kind of step up and be like, yeah, we're just as good as everybody thought. Love it. It's really kind of shaped the league this year. And it's made a lot of games, especially for the race again for 6th, 7th, 8th, which isn't always as exciting. Really exciting because you've got some superstars on those teams too. So stoked to see what the last couple of weeks of the WNBA season bring. And now we're going to switch over to a chat I had late last week with NWSLPA President Tori Huster. As people might remember, the big CBA of abolishing the draft, setting up revenue share, free agency, guaranteed contracts, kind of this revolutionary CBA negotiated by the NWSLPA and the NWSL Board of Governors. I got to talk to Huster about all of that, but kind of from the vantage point of 1 week later, the response to this announcement, kind of what they've seen from the country or even globally after the announcement was made, getting into some of the nitty gritty of why the NWSL is not going to lose the parity it so prizes with this new structure and more. Lovely, lovely chat with Tori Huster. Check it out. So we are here with NWSLPA President and Washington Spirit legend, Tori Huster. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tori.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me on.
Maybe the best place to start is where we are just on this day, right? We are a week from the PA announcing a historic new CBA, which maybe the big talking points are the elimination of the draft, introducing revenue sharing, guaranteeing contracts, making sure that players have unrestricted free agency at the end of contracts. Let's start with the right now. How has this week been? How has the response been? I know you've been doing a lot of media availability. What has this week looked like for you?
Honestly, I didn't even know that it had been a week already. It's like this weird phase where we had ratified and then we waited to announce, and now it's been a week since we announced, but I'm in this weird, I don't know, 5th dimension. But overall, very, very proud. And the response has been pretty much all positive. I think some discourse around, the draft and some of these different changes has been, I wouldn't even say it's been negative. I'm extremely excited that there's been conversation around this and people are asking questions, and it's like, it's the same questions that we asked at the beginning too. Like, is this the direction that we want to go? Is this going to be better for our players? And do our players want this? All of these questions that people are asking now, is this going to be good for the growth of the league? All that stuff were things that we asked, and it's pretty cool to see the general public ask those same questions, and certainly fun to answer.
Well, maybe that's the best way to kind of jump off of this. How nice is it to see these kinds of announcements can be, kind of getting in the weeds, and maybe in the past in women's sports, people might gloss over it or maybe not even ask the questions, right? Just only focus on some of the big picture things. How nice has it been to have those conversations and be able to talk to different people about what this means, not only in the grand scheme, but sort of on the granular level?
The coverage itself it's extremely important at this moment, and that's what we wanted. As soon as we knew we were going to ratify this, just having the players be able to voice their participation and their power in this whole process, and in addition, credit the league that they were willing to make these changes, and that there's going to be a lot of investment that's going to need to be, pumped into the league for the next couple of years, several years now. All of that is extremely important, and yeah, it's just credit to everyone that was involved. It took a lot of work and a lot of time, but overall, I think the just all the coverage and the information getting out there, and to be able to have these conversations so that there's a level of transparency about where we're trying to go, so that we can bring more people and just have more people understand what our league is about, and what we want it to look like for the next 6 years.
Absolutely. Maybe it's good to jump in there, right? Talking about the big picture moment, the historic abolishing of both the college and the expansion drafts, being the first top tier league to not only have a draft, but get rid of it. For you, this is maybe this two-sided thing of how much of this, because there is so much of this idea that the positives outweigh maybe some of the difficulties, how unique is it for the NWSL to be able to make that call based on how just world football works, right? The systems that happen in Europe and around the world. And also, where do you think it lands sort of making this decision in American sports?
I think it's the global standard. I'm hearing you kind of touch on that a little bit. It's the global standard. It's removing a barrier to entry for the great, players that are in other countries at the moment, and not deterring really good college players in our country from wanting to enter into our league, not missing out on those players, because some of the ones that we've seen exit and go to the WSL, we don't want to miss out on those players. We want them to stay here. We want the best and most talented players to play here. But yeah, I think overall it says a lot about what we were able to get done, when you have so many people in our country celebrating something like the draft, and that there's lots of money that's pumped into having a draft and making that really big. And that might be the best thing for some of those other leagues. We took a look at it and we said, yeah, we can do something else. There's other opportunities to celebrate when we bring new players into the league. And yeah, eliminating the draft, I think people haven't really understood how monumental of a shift that is. And yeah, it's pretty cool to have done that, and to have not only all the players in agreement that that's the best thing, but also a league that is an American league, and there's ownership groups that are in other leagues as well, and to take a different perspective and a different step, I think it's pretty cool, and pretty powerful.
I mean, you have to imagine, right, that other American leagues are going to be watching this with great interest, right, to see sort of what happens when you take that mechanism out, if there is a better way to move forward. I do think, I mean, this is just me editorializing, but when we look back on this CBA, the abolishing of the draft is going to be just a huge data point in this moment in time for all of American sports, I think. But is there maybe an underrated part of the new CBA that for you personally, you think is going to have a major impact that maybe hasn't been focused on as much?
A lot of focus has been on the big headliners, guaranteed contracts, no trades without player consent. Yeah, all of the free agency for all of those things. But I think what we were really intentional about was, with a longer term, and also with a little more flexibility in the schedule of NWSL, they can just have a little bit more wiggle room there. We really worked hard to ensure that there were guardrails around workload management. And being, recently retired, I understand how important performance is. And if we want players to have long, healthy careers, there needs to be things that are adjacent and that help support those players to have the best performance that they can. That's what people are watching is the players play. And I think oftentimes we forget that, especially when there is more investment. There's all these other things that come with the fame of being a professional athlete. But at the end of the day, you are a professional athlete because you can play a sport really well. And affording these players the opportunity to do so is it's just paramount to what we were trying to get done at the bargaining table. So things in terms of frequency of games, charter flights, opening up that policy a little bit more, introducing new staff members that will be required staff. I mean, even down to a surface expert that the NWSL will have to hire and report back on all of the surfaces throughout the league. Those types of things, anything that kind of touches what may have an impact to performance was really important to us. And so we had conversations about that and then tried to get that into the contract.
Well, and that seems directly tied to maybe, like you said, not even just concerns, but that discussion around getting rid of the draft, because everyone goes, yes, the NWSL, most competitive soccer league in the world. There's a side to maybe say that these parity rules contribute to that. But the other side of that is you say, well, raising labor standards also contributes to everything being as competitive as possible from a player's perspective, because it is your job as the union to mostly, you're advocating for the players, right? But there is a level of care to maintaining what makes the NWSL so special. So what were some of those discussions of how do we kind of raise labor practices to maybe offset getting rid of some of those parity rules that let teams with smaller budgets utilize something like the draft?
Yeah, I think a lot of the minimum standards we wanted to raise right away. Even when we talked about the economics of the deal, in order to make every player's experience one that is an attractive, viable career for players that are collegiate athletes trying to get into the league or players that are coming from overseas trying to make a name for themselves. The economics of the deal, we really tried to raise the bar there. And even straight down to something in terms of appearances, making those minimums allows the ability for clubs to do a bit more on top of that. And I think that's what we're looking for, is like raise labor practices and standards all across. And then in comes the parity and the competitiveness that if you want to win, and this is a pro league, you're gonna have to invest, and you can choose where you want to invest. And that's how I think we're going to see clubs differentiate. They could invest in more staff members, or they could invest in having the best facilities, and that's up to them. But I think as a labor union, we really needed to just raise the bar foundationally across the league. We did okay in the first contract, and we did what we needed to. And now this contract was a chance to level up. And I think that's what we saw at the bargaining table, was everyone, league and players included, really just took this as an opportunity to level up the league in order to make sure and ensure that it is the best league in the world.
Was there any, maybe surprise is the wrong word, but the fact that the league was so open to this is also very historic, right? Was there a different tenor to those conversations? Like you said, the first contract is so hard because it's the first one. Also, just the era in which that contract was ratified was a very difficult era in the NWSL's history for the players especially. What was the energy in the room? And it just seems like maybe, did you feel like you saw more ambition on the other side going into making these changes?
Everyone put in a lot of time and energy for this. And even behind the scenes too, I don't know how many hours of time that NWSL spent away from an actual Zoom session with us. I know that we put in the work. I mean, I've never seen as many legal documents as I have in the past 10 months. So regardless of tenor, like it goes up and down, it's positive and negative at times, because I think when you have two sides, you have different priorities across the board. But overall, I think everyone was very committed to getting a really good deal. And we also came to the table voluntarily. Credit to NWSL that they sent us notice first. We wanted to send them notice too, and they just beat us to the punch. But we were all there at the table voluntarily. And understanding too that if we couldn't get a good deal out of this now, that in 26 our now old contract would be
Right.
up. And so I think when you're dealing with that, it makes it a little, it takes the pressure off, let's say. And you can really see and suss out what the other side wants and vice versa. And I think overall at the end of it's a win for everyone. I think everyone keeps saying when the players win, everyone wins. So I'll say it again.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'll even say it from the media side. It feels like one of the big wins here too is just the simplification of everything, right? Even American soccer leagues are kind of known for adding in, like allocation money, and we're going to have these different terms for restricted and unrestricted free agency, and just sort of adding more and more things to add sort of these conditions to contracts. How much easier is it on the player side to just have sort of this simple pitch, like you said, even to the European market or the global market, of when you're out of contract, you're out of contract. When you want to sign with somebody, you sign with somebody. On the player side, how important is it just to kind of even just simplify this from where the league was going in the past, where there was a lot of sort of complication?
There's definitely a simplification of it across the board. I think when one set of rules is being used globally and we're using a different set of rules, I think to just make it the same, it streamlines the process for all involved. And makes it easier for players to understand too that these are the new rules that we're operating under. It makes it easier for agents too that are potentially overseas agents and representing their players, because I think agents and coaches, players alike, from an international perspective, would hear these things like just the discovery process and be very shook and shocked that they had no idea what team owned their rights. That concept was hard to understand. So yes, I definitely think from that perspective, there's a simplification. I think when we got into the weeds on the economics of the deal, that's where you may see it a little more complicated. And the complexities of that are just due to really trying to, again, making things for minimum salaried players and across the board players who are in whatever market they're in, just ensuring that they have a livable wage. And that we are very market specific when we talk about housing and the allowances that are made for people to be able to live. We're not talking about millions of dollars yet for players' contracts. Hopefully soon we will be, but until then, we have players that in 2025 will be making $48,000 in a place like LA, Bay, potentially Boston. When they come in, it's going to be hard for them to pay rent. So just making sure that everybody across the roster is well cared for. That was something that was, everybody that was on the bargaining committee felt that was very important. And that was cool to see, because we have people on our bargaining committee who have won World Cups, and making sure that their teammates are well cared for was it was important.
Totally. And then last one, just kind of looking forward, you mentioned the terms of the deal, making it advantageous for both sides to get this done, because there is increasing TV money coming in. We're seeing attendances be very strong in every market. There's more competition, right? There's the USL coming in. There's going to be more greater, bigger women's soccer in America going forward. And this is an ambitious contract, even just in sort of the revenue share model of putting that back into the salary cap. And so the minimums have the possibility to get larger. What is next for the PA? Is it now just sort of enforcing these minimums and making sure that across all markets these are being reached? Huge win for you guys, but what would you say comes next to turn this wave into just this sustained growth going forward?
It's definitely implementation of the contract. That's the biggest thing for us. It's also education of the contract too, because as things shift for players, we need to let them know and just make sure that they understand all the particulars of the deal and take advantage of the deal as well. Our player reps, I'll tell you, they do so much work behind the scenes to ensure that the contract is it's something that their clubs are following. And oftentimes, a club may not be following it to a T, and it just takes a phone call. or it could really just be some oversight. But making sure that we have those things in place, like education and just making sure that what is written on paper is actually what players are experiencing in market and on the ground. That's the biggest part for us. But I'll tell you, Megan already has a document for the next round of negotiations, as you can imagine. So always thinking ahead. And I think as the league grows, women's sports grow, soccer grows in our country with a new media deal, with different tournaments that will be held in our country, it's going to be super important to continue to take advantage of the momentum that we create and make sure that players are also participating in the success of the league.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tori, for joining us. This has been NWSLPA President Tori Huster, and best of luck with everything that comes next.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having me.
And this has been this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. Guys, we are in the home stretch. Just a couple weeks of WNBA regular season left. We've got some NWSL running to the end of November. This is it. The big international tournaments are over. We are digging into the domestic game, and I can't wait week to week to talk about who's rising, who's falling, and who I think could win it all.